Hi, I'm Brooks Berndt, the UCC's Minister for Environmental Justice. I'm grateful for this opportunity to join you in this webinar to share a few thoughts about churches going solar. I know one of the big things churches wrestle with often is just the financial part of going solar and how do we do it and how do we make it happen? And I'm grateful that others on this call will be able to address those questions. But what I want to share with you are some things that I think are also vitally important, which relate to the faith aspect of going solar. And so I've got three things I want to share with you: stepping out on faith, diving deep with faith, and reaching out in faith. So let me unpack each of those. First, the idea of stepping out on faith when going solar. It can be a lot to figure out. How do we do this financially? But I always encourage people to remember, as one of my professors used to say, faith is about stepping out on nothing and landing on something, right? And and we have some churches that have done just that. We have a church in North Carolina that couldn't figure out how to get the money, so they turned to the surrounding community and asked people for money, found a way to do that, thinking creatively, and then they were able to get the money they needed to go solar. And all that started by stepping out on faith in a situation where other people might have just thrown their hands up and given up. The second thing I mentioned is diving deep in faith. And that's to think about, how can one make going solar, an experience that's transformative for a congregation? And there's a lot of ways to do that. One is to think about, okay, how can we accompany ourselves in this process with our worship, with our scripture, with how we reflect upon this in relationship to what it means to live out our calling as Christians. I often refer to this work as our first calling. In the Bible, the first job that God gives us is to be caretakers of God's creation. So just being mindful that going solar is more than just installing some panels and figuring out the finances. It can also be a really transformative experience for a congregation. So think about how to do that. The UCC has resources too that might be helpful. We have a Creation Justice Churches program, which has lots of ideas for kind of the total package of thinking about, how do we live out this calling of ours to be caretakers of God's creation. The third thing I mentioned is reaching out in faith. And there, what I would encourage you to think about doing is whether or not there might be opportunities to share the good news of going solar, so to speak, with people in your community. And there's a number of places throughout the United States where there are solar co-ops. In fact, there's a nonprofit organization that really does a lot of that work nationwide, and they have chapters all over the place. It's called Solar Neighbors United. And what they do is they kind of figure out how to bring people together in a community, go through a process of deciding solar installers that reflect the community values that they want to have in the process. And then they go together and they buy solar together. A bunch of residents, and in some cases churches, will come together, and then they get a better price because they're coming together to buy. And so that's something I think is really worth exploring. We've got a church here in Ohio that's currently partnering with our local chapter of Solar Neighbors United. And so really, think of, are there ways in which we can live out our calling to go beyond the walls of our church as Christians? That's ultimately kind of what it means to live out our calling as disciples, I feel, is to do that outward looking aspect of our faith. And so those are my three ideas I wanted to share with you. Happy to be in touch with people. Take care and God bless.